Okay, in this Fusion tutorial, I'm going to be pulling the mustache out of a still image and then applying it onto another piece of footage. And we are going to surface track the face and get the mustache applied really well in movement. And then we're going to work on some of the last little compositing things with blurs and sharpening to really make it sit in. But more than that, we're also going to look at a way to do the effect overall, but then to also go back and reanalyze our node flow to make sure we're doing this in the most efficient way possible to make sure our footage stays sharp and crisp and doesn't take any filtering hits. So let's go ahead and get into it. So before we get into the tutorial, I just kind of want to explain some things I don't think a ton of people know about when it comes to some of the filtering hits and how we can kind of work to kind of keep our footage looking the best as possible. So a little example here is I have my footage. I have the plate we're going to work on today. And I just wanted to show you what happens here where we have an example. I have two transform nodes here. I have a scale down and then a scale up. And so this is going to scale it down really small. I have it scaled down to 0.05. So if our comp is 1920 by 1080, I've scaled our footage down. And then I've made another node that's going to scale it up 20 on top of that scale down. And if you look at this, if I go back and forth, it should look identical, right? And so just to clearly demonstrate what I'm doing here, I have a transform node. I'm taking it, I'm scaling it down. And then I'm creating another transfer node on top of that. And then I'm scaling it back up. And then just to show again, take it, scale it down. Right? So we have a bunch of these transforms that are happening. And every time the footage is being processed. But the little thing here is you have something called concatenation. And so as long as you keep these transforms in order without breaking their chain, they're only going to process once, right? So it's just going to do the math once and then give you the output right here. So it's kind of ignoring the fact that you're taking it, you're down resing it, you're taking a down res, and then you're up resing it, and then you're down resing it again. It's just going to run the math on all these and just give you what the final output's going to be with like one process, right? So if I take these, smooth them off. So I look at our scale down, we have this really tiny clip. You take this, scale it back up, and watch what happens when I just add one node in here that's not a transform node in between these two. So if I add a color corrector and don't even change anything on it, you're going to see how our footage immediately de-reses because we've now broken that chain. So we have this scale down, it's now processed, it's flattened, and then we've broken the chain by adding something that's not a transform node. So now this is the new resolution of the image as far as processing is concerned. And so now we take that and then scale it back up, and now that's what we got. We have this essentially a couple hundred pixels, if that, in quality, and we've scaled it back up and ballooned it back to HD. And so as soon as you go ahead and remove that node, then it goes back to normal. So I just wanted to share an example of how your footage can kind of take quality hits without you realizing it. And so good practice is to kind of keep all of these kind of processes that belong together, and then remove anything that could potentially harm or hurt the final image. So if you're working on something and it's adding a hit to your footage, but it doesn't necessarily need it, that's kind of what I'm going to show in this tutorial. So I just want to give you an example for like something like this concatenation and how just being aware of it can help you keep your footage looking the best as possible. So yeah, try to keep your transforms together, try to keep your color correctors together. It's both clean in your node flow and obviously it does affect your footage, whether you realize it or not. Okay, here are the assets for this video. I've got a clip here and it's of a man smiling. What we're going to do is we're going to surface track this, and then we're actually going to steal a mustache from this photo. So I'm just going to use this part of it. I downloaded the full res of this. It's 4,000 by 6,000. We obviously don't need that much res, but then when you go in and cut this out, it's only going to be a couple hundred pixels big. So we want to make sure we get as much res as possible. We're just going to go ahead and start by tracking our plate, getting it stabilized, and then we're going to work on compositing that mustache in. So first things first, I'm just going to copy my loader here, paste it down, and let's just run this through a service tracker. Loading up our service tracker, I'm just going to go to the very first frame, zoom in here, and I'm just going to grab all around his face, starting around the jawline, and then I'm going to go over the cheek and above the nose. Going to mesh, it's going to give us a pretty good amount of points here, and because he smiles, there's going to be some deformation that I want to make sure we're getting. So I'm gonna leave the mesh right about where it's at. We might need to do some tweaking, but we can just start there. Now on the track, I actually want to turn up a little bit up the motion range, and then I'm going to keep the mesh rigidity the same. Being a mustache, I don't want it to deform like skin. I want it to deform, but not so pixel perfect. So we're just going to leave the mesh rigidity the same, set the quality to better. And then we are just going to go to track. Okay, and now once that's done tracking, we're going to go ahead and set up our stabilize and unstabilize. So I'm going to go into the surface tracker, go to result, and change this to stabilize warp input 1. So now we have a really solid stabilization of just the mouth. The next thing we'll do is we will copy this, paste it below, and we're going to make sure we plug this into the green input. And we want to take our original footage and pipe it into the yellow input. So I'm just going to hold Alt to create a router node here. And I'm going to do the same above here just so we can really read our node flow a little easier. We have our stabilize, and then in our surface tracker, we're going to make sure we set this to rewarp stabilize clip. So if we were to view that now, we should essentially have the exact same footage as up here. We can confirm that by scrubbing through, look at our original clip, and then look at our stabilized. So there's going to be one slight difference. And if you zoom in here, I picked a clip here that has a little bit of some detail we can zoom in on here. So if I compare these two images, it gets a little bit softer, right? So there's our result, there's our original, there's our result. Everything gets a little bit softer. And that's the filtering hit. That is the process of stabilizing an image and unstabilizing it. There's going to be a slight filter hit. So currently what we have is footage going in, being stabilized, and then wholesale being unstabilized. So now this is our new final image. So now that we have that set up, let's go ahead and make some room for ourselves. I'm going to go ahead and move this down, and then I'm going to take our mustache plate, and I'm going to paste it over here, and we can start working on the compositing of cutting that mustache out. So I'm going to view that real quick. Okay, looking at our mustache clip here, I am going to use a luma keyer to work on extracting our mustache here. So luma keyer, look at that. I'm going to invert it. So we work on the mustache here, and I'm gonna hit A so we can look at the alpha that it's actually being pulled here. And I'm gonna go over to our low and high slider, and I'm going to adjust these a little bit. As I pull the high down, it's gonna crush out a lot of the extra detail we don't need. So I'm gonna call this 0.37. And for the low end, let's just call it 0.03. Okay, we've got a pretty solid extraction here. So now I'm going to refine the luma keyer a little bit and add a polygon mask. And I'm going to mask just around our mustache here. There's a lot of detail in there that we do want to keep, so we don't want the luma keyer to remove that. So I'm going to bring this in here, hold Alt, and set it to a solid matte. And we can add a little bit of feathering on that. So let's go back out to our non-alpha. You can kind of see what that's doing here. If I disable this and re-enable it, it's keeping a lot more of the detail that's inside of the mustache. Next thing is there's a lot of stuff we don't need to worry about here. So I'm going to create a quick matte control, and then I'm going to create another polygon. And this, I'm just going to outline the mustache so that we only have to worry about the mustache. And then holding Alt, drag it over to the matte control and select garbage matte. And then if we view that, it should do the opposite of what we want. So we make sure in our matte control, we go to garbage matte and invert it. And then with this matte, we can tweak it a little bit and remove the mouth that was in that image. So we can mess with some of the polygons here, and make sure you are still on the same frame that you created it on, because it does create a keyframe. So uncheck that so that this mask doesn't animate over time as we tweak this. Okay, we've got a solid start here. So now we have this really big image that's 4,000 by 6,000 with an isolated mustache on it. We don't want to have to process all of this extra detail that's not here, right? We don't want to have to keep processing a 6,000 pixel image. So we're going to add a crop onto this. It's always good to remember, keep your workspace as optimized as possible. So if you added the crop on, you'll see that it disappeared. So we're going to go to auto crop. Select that. And so now we have the true res of just the pixels that are needed to process this mustache, which is 1300 by 400. So it's at this stage I want to start adding it into the rest of the composite, just so we can start seeing what we're looking at. And an important thing to remember is that we did our tracking on this face from the very first frame. So frame 0. As a reminder, I want to make sure I note that, so that as we work on this composite, we try to remember to do all the work on the initially tracked frame. I want to make sure that we remind ourselves that our reference frame is 0, and that's the frame we should be doing our compositing work on. So Close that up. We can just leave that over here somewhere by our tracker. So yeah, at this point we have a flow here, do a flow here, and I'm going to create a merge node and add that in right here. And then I'm going to pipe over our mustache work, add a little router so we can clearly define the flow downwards and then to the left. And let's go ahead and view that merge node to see what we're looking at. It's pretty big. So yeah, this is where we're kind of finding the size of, we can start messing with the position and stuff. So already you can kind of tell that this is going to be a hard edge. So we can start cleaning that up right now. On the polygon, just go ahead and add a feather to that for the matte control. So obviously I think we need to scale this down a bit. So let's go ahead and add a transform node. And I'm just going to scale this down a little bit. I'm going to move it up and kind of try to position it above his lips and under his nose and try to find just the right kind of scaling we need for it. I think this is going to work for now. And now that it's kind of in our self-contained stabilize, we can actually view this in our unstabilized to see what it's doing so far. So let's go ahead and watch that down real quick. Overall, the track looks pretty solid so far, and now we can kind of start focusing on actually compositing this mustache in. So the movement's locked in, let's start working on composite. Okay, now that we have some smooth playback on what our track looks like, we can take time to start compositing the mustache. So it's a little dark. The next thing I'm going to do is go in here and we have our crop, we have our transform. I'm hit F2 and just rename this to POS for position. There's something I want to do here when I look at this mustache. So when we look at this image, it's pretty straight on. And we go back to our footage and his head's not 100% straight on. There's a little bit of a tilt to it. So after our position here, I'm going to make sure I'm viewing our merge. We actually view our unstabilized surface track here. So we have our crop, we have our transform, and I'm going to add a corner pin now. And it's going to look funky. Something I like to do, which I kind of wish was a standard thing, is I like to reset all of these to be zeroed out. So you kind of start with your most undistorted image. So I'm going to get these close. And then you can see that these just need to get rounded up to 0 and 1. This one should be 1, 0, 0, 1, 0. So this should give us a completely undistorted version. And so let's go back and look at our final. And if we reference this note we left ourselves, the reference frame is 0. So we should be lining this up on the 0 frame. So I'm going to go to the 0 frame and then I'm going to go to my corner position. And I'm looking at the top right corner and the bottom right corner. So let's go to top right and let's play with these sliders a little bit. I want to push it down to the left. Let's go up a little bit. Let's look at the bottom right as well. I'm going to push it to the right and down a little bit. So this is kind of just adding a nice little offset to our mustache so that it's not a perfectly straight on. And then as we kind of scrub through, we can see it really does just make that much more of a difference, just being able to see it's slightly cocked. So it's a nice little adjustment there, and we can go ahead and see what that's doing by disabling it before and after. It's kind of pushing it into perspective. Next thing we're going to do is start working with the colors to kind of get all the black levels to start matching the rest of the shot. So I'm going to organize these a little bit. I'm going to push these together. These are more of our mattes. And then we have more of our position. And then now I'm going to worry about color. So I'm going to add a color corrector node here. And the first thing I want to do is, it's looking a little cold. You can hit R, G, and B to look at our individual color channels. But if I hit R on and off, it kind of gives you a glimpse and it shows you how cool this mustache is compared to the rest of this. Cool as in not warm, it's definitely more blue. So I'm going to go into the color corrector and I'm going to grab the offset here and I'm going to push it a lot more orange. Go about there, maybe down a little bit. It's going to look a little bit over exaggerated, but we're definitely just trying to push some warmth into it. I'm going to finalize this at like 0.075 and the strength at 0.28. And saturation we're actually going to bring down to about 0.75. So we've got a good basic colors here. but definitely still a bit too orange. Something I like to do when I'm kind of color matching is I'm going to go into the levels adjustment, and it's probably just the way I work coming out of as an After Effects user, but I like to switch this over from colors to levels, and then I got my sliders I can kind of worry about here. And I'm just going to go and lift the blacks up a little bit here. And you can see the color corrector is actually breaking our image. Something you should always remember to do is in your color corrector is go to options. Because we're dealing with having an alpha channel, go to options and pre-divide post-multiply. That's going to fix that adjustment right there. So check that box. Go back to our colors. And yeah, I'm going to lift the blacks up a little bit and kind of eyeball this. I have a proxy turned on. I'm going to adjust that so we can see it's in real time. And I think I'm just going to push this to about 0.06. That's looking nice. It's nice and warm. It's lifted with the jacket, and we can kind of on off to see how far it's come. That's looking pretty good. I'm not liking some of the orange I'm seeing here. I might go back to our colors and pull the saturation down just a little bit more. Let's go with 0.68. Keep it a round number. On off. That's looking very nice. So yeah, the next thing I'm looking at is we kind of have this focus plane that's going down the center of his face. So let's start matching some blur levels and sharpening levels. It's going to help the mustache sit in a little bit nicer. Okay, I'm going to go and add an unsharpened mask now. This is going to bring some detail in on some of the higher pass detail. On off, you can kind of see what that's doing. It's giving us a decent kind of focus added back in, and I think we're just going to turn the size down on this just a little bit. Just go about 0.28. We'll just call it 0.3 and on off. It's very subtle, but it's kind of bringing back in. Actually, let's bring that up just a little bit. I do like what that's doing, so let's call it 0.35. Cool. I'm liking that. Play that through. So you start looking at stuff that stands out to you. You can see we're looking at focus now, so definitely having these sharp edges of this mustache up against his out of focus face should tell us that this needs to be also out of focus. But we have lips that are a little bit more in focus, and so we want to keep this more in focus, and then it falls back out of focus again on the left. So let's kind of simulate that depth of field that's happening there. So I'm just going to create a blur node, very simple, and by default that's set to 1. You can see what it's doing. It looks like it is affecting our alpha here, but let's worry about that in a little bit. Okay, so for my blur node, I think I'm going to increase it. So we're just going to treat this as the global blur. Let's say go up to 2. So that looks like it's nice and out of focus over here. And it looks like it might go 2 out of focus over here. So we'll play with some feathering now. So I'm going to bring an ellipse in, attach that to our blur node there. And then I'm going to thin this down. And let's just go back to our 0 frame to make sure we're working on this accurately. So right now it's the inverse of what we want. We want to have the outsides fall out of focus. So I'm just going to check the invert button. And then I'm going to give this a big feather and then widen this out a little bit. So now we have a pretty decent looking depth of blur kind of mimic that's happening here. Let's go ahead and watch that. So I like that this is looking a little bit too out of focus for me. So I might favor this ellipse over here to bring more of that into focus, but then just have it feather a little bit. So maybe it's just catching the feather fall off is what blurs that part. But I do like what's happening over here. This is looking nice. So looking pretty solid there with our blur. I think one of the last things this could use is some kind of contact shadow. I mean, it's kind of invisibly sitting on his face. I think having some kind of darkening here would help sell like it's actually sitting there. So make a little bit of room here. I'm just going to grab our mustache composite and slide it up just a little bit. Okay, let's go in here and add a shadow. So bring in a shadow. So you can kind of see what it's doing. This is essentially acting as a drop shadow, and going over to the shadow offset, going to tell us where this is going to go. And I'm going to slide this just super slightly down. I'm definitely worried about more of the bottom contact shadow because our lighting is coming from the top right up here. So our shadows should be coming down from the bottom left more. So let's just do that. Super small adjustments here. I'm going to pull the the softening up quite a lot, but this is all a little bit distracting. So I want to focus on where exactly this is happening at. So I'm going to bring in another polygon and let's look directly at the shadow and select your polygon. I want to draw a mask that just kind of sits inside. Again, kind of like what our matte mask was doing, but I want this to just kind of fill the insides and then apply that as your mask. And if we go back to our output, you can see our mask is giving us a little weird thing there. So we're just going to make sure that we feather this. And then I'm also going to uncheck the animation to make sure that we can kind of tweak this as we go. So make sure we're on the first frame again. I'm going to tighten up the inside of this because the feathers is going to fill it out a little bit more, and I can pull it off the top a lot more than the bottom here. So let's just go ahead and see what that's doing. I think we can bring our mask down a little bit lower here, just to make sure our shadow is actually being applied. You can see what that's doing there. Okay, let's go to the shadow, and then I'm also going to tweak the shadow a little bit. It's a little bold, so I'm going to bring the alpha down on it. I think about something around 0.3 is nice, just so it's not super strong. So let's see what that's looking like now. It's looking pretty solid. I'm liking this so far. Something it's nice to do is kind of go back and like look at some of our compositing corrections and blurs here and see how far it's actually come. If you go up here, you can turn off show controls and you can see how big of a difference this makes from where you started, and then what your corrections kind of have added to it to really make it sit in there as a really nice clean composite. I like how it's looking. So I'm gonna do a little bit of organization here. I'm actually going to select all of this and create an underlay. If you hold Alt and click it, you can select it by itself and rename it to mustache. And then I'm going to make it something purple. So now that we know this is our whole composite for mustache. Okay, let's go ahead and review our node flow here, where we can start to look at what's going to start helping make this a cleaner composite. So if we check this out again, we have our stabilized work here. We're merging on our composite, and then we are reapplying the stabilization back onto our main plate. So like I showed you before, there is a noticeable quality hit after you stabilize and unstabilize. Everything is a little softer. We have to track the whole face because we want that information to be tracked so that we can apply this correctly. But there's no need to reapply everything that's over here. Everything in these areas right here doesn't need to be affected if the only thing that we're actually worrying about is our mustache, right? So we want to look at this from the point of view of how do we get this into a more isolated composite, because currently once we've reapplied our mustache, we are now back locked on top of our whole footage. So we want to work on isolating the mustache and then merging that back onto our main plate so that we can keep things as organized and isolated, and gives us more of a scalpel approach to making tweaks, right? So the next thing we should do is actually take our surface tracker here, maybe copy it, paste it down here, and we're going to take the router node and pipe it into the yellow input, and we're just going to change it from stabilize warp input 1 to create mesh alpha mask. And so if we look at that now, we now have a perfect mask already generated for us using the same service tracker. So I'm gonna add another router here just to make sure we can follow this flow off. And so now we can use this as a matte to cut out the work that we've done here. So if we create a matte control, and I'm gonna use this as a garbage mask, and if we view that now, it's gonna punch out the opposite. So go and we invert it. We now have our mask back out again, stabilized with our composite. So now create a merge, and then we just keep piping our main B line here and merge this back on top, right? So now we have stabilization coming in. We have the work being applied on top of it. We have to unstabilize, and then we have an isolation of our work that's then piped back on. And so the benefit of something like this is, let's say you wanted to add like a color corrector after the fact and you want to tweak something. So you're only affecting less of the image, right? Because now we're not stuck with having our whole entire image again, but now we can actually tweak the only part that is being affected. So I'll leave that there. We're going to add one more adjustment here. The last thing we should add on to this is film grain. I'm going to stack this like this. Make sure it has some film grain, and you can kind of start to see the problem we're already running into here. So yeah, the problem we're already running into is that we want to add film grain to our mustache after it's been spit back out of our composite, but it's going to apply it to all of this extra information that we are kind of forced to have inside of our surface tracker. So I'm just going to refine this film grain real quick, get it somewhere that we want, because we definitely want to have grain when we apply a single image. It's going to be the first thing that makes it look a little fake if you don't see some form of imperfection in it. So I'm going to leave the size the same. I'm going to bring the strength down quite a lot, and let's just say 0.002. And then I'm going to bring the roughness up a lot, so we kind of have a little bit rougher grain. That should be fine. Go with that and hit play, and we can kind of on off it, see what it's doing. It might be hard to tell in the video recording, but you definitely want to make sure you have some kind of grain in there. But the problem is it's being applied to our whole entire image, which is also being softened as we saw before. So how can we take this one step further to really making sure that it's a nice clean composite without hurting any of the original plate? Let's look at our flow here, and we can refine some things. So once the surface tracker has been made, all of our work is done on this frame. So when we look at this frame, this is essentially telling us where we want to do our composite. It told us where we could add a mustache to make it look right. This is just undoing that work. So once we've already done the work, placed it where we want it to, we don't technically need this footage pipe in here anymore, but that is going to break it. So what we can do is actually create a background node. Let's make some room. We're getting a little bit cramped here. So I'm going to move these router nodes up. Let's put this background node in. And now you can see we now have our composite being just placed back on top of a black solid. And then once we get the unstabilization to happen, this still doesn't quite work, right? So now we just have a black solid showing what our composite's doing as it's being placed back on top. What we have to do now is replace this input that is taking our original footage and piping into a yellow input, and replace that with the black. This doesn't quite solve our problem yet. It really is an easy fix from here on out. So now we have a perfect isolation of our composite that has all the movement reapplied back onto it on its own, but you wouldn't just use this as like a transfer mode going on, because you don't want to use a transfer mode for this. So if you go to your background, you can actually turn your alpha down to 0, and that's now going to produce our work with perfect alpha on its own. So now our composite is completely free to actually move this over here so you can see what it's doing. We're free to add tweaks, and now when we do something like add film grain onto it, it's only being added on to the mustache. I'm going to go in here and disable this, or if we go and add color corrector node and we want to tweak this, it's only tweaking just the mustache after all of this has been done. So, and you might ask, like, why not just add these kind of corrections down here at the bottom of this flow? The problem is anytime you add something like grain, or if you're gonna do like a motion blur, after it gets piped back into our onto our unstabilized work and then restabilized, it's gonna have warping applied to it. So you don't want warping grain. So we can go through, get rid of this. We turn our film grain up just a little bit. I think the strength is just a little too low. We can crank it up now, since it's not on top of his whole entire face. On off, that's nice. So yeah, we have a solid composite right now. And something I do like to kind of keep around here, and we can kind of start organizing some of these things. So now that we've kind of worked on using this to kind of remove and isolate, we actually don't need this these nodes anymore. So now we can kind of, we don't want to do this. That's actually a really good example there. There is a setting in here where when a router is created next to, or a node is created next to a router, there's an actual feature that will delete routers. So if I'm deleting this down here, it's actually, or it might be this one. When I delete this node, okay, so none of them matter. So if I delete these, it's gonna, yeah, so that's an interesting. So if I delete these two nodes, it actually deletes the two routers at the top, which I don't want. I think if you go into your file preferences, and we can go, pretty sure it's in a global setting, into flow, there is a auto remove routers. We can go ahead and uncheck that. I'm gonna hit save, and so hopefully these should not go away anymore. They still do. You should uncheck that. I'm gonna delete this one at a time, this one at a time. That still breaks it. Disconnect it. delete it. We still, okay. So there's no option there. Delete. Nope, can't do that. So we actually don't need these. I'm just gonna delete them. We could redraw this. I like to have it there as like, if I ever wanted to go back and retrack this, I can actually just attach this here, because if you want to do any more placement, again, you don't have that visibility until you reattach your image to it. So I like to have some of these kind of things still hanging here so I can reattach, make a quick change. But yeah, so now that we've kind of like isolated our composite here, so that it has its own alpha, we've cleaned up how many nodes we need. We've been able to actually make this a more accurate composite because we're not affecting the rest of our image just to put a mustache on here. And yeah, there's one more thing I can show you here that I think is actually super helpful. Once you kind of set this thing up, yeah, once you have a setup like this where you've done your tracking and you're done with it, so then you kind of re-add this back in here. Something I like to do is, there might be a cleaner way to do this. Let me find this here. So actually just add, let's just keep this up here and we can add a switch node. And so what we can do here is add switch here, pipe the original footage into that switch. And so now you have an input and 0 and input 1. And I will then just Control C and then add a Control Shift V here. And so that creates an instant, and I will then pipe this in here and then use this router to pipe that in there to create 2. And this goes into the gold. So this is a little bit messy here. I want to find a better way to do this. Try to make this a little bit more readable. But what we can do now is that if we just change this one, so if we're looking at our work again and we want to go, oh, I want to switch this back to input 1, it'll automatically switch both of these. You can sit here and do your work like you did beforehand. And then when you're ready to go back and say, hey, I want my alpha back right here, go back to your switch and you can return that back. So that's your final composite is back to how you want it. So let me take some time to reorganize these to make this a little bit more legible. I don't like things end up looking like this. Okay, I've gone through and kind of straightened this out a little bit just to be a little more readable. It's not perfect, but I think it helps get the point across, but you can kind of follow the flow. I've got my footage coming down into pipe router switch, and then from the switch to the tracker switch here. I'm not going to see anything because we have it turned on. But yeah, there's our tracker. There's our mustache applied and then reapplied back. And then I'm just going to turn the switch back off. So now mustache is isolated. And then just to kind of bring this back around to what I was explaining at the very beginning about working in an organized way and kind of keeping track of how you're stacking your nodes. So if you go back to the beginning, I explained you can use transforms to scale up your footage and scale it back down. And as long as you kind of keep them stacked together, it'll process that math once. So just to kind of take a look at what we've done here, I've made sure to keep kind of my matte nodes that are helping me produce a matte. I'll kind of keep these grouped together. And then I have these 3 nodes that are more transform and position based. So I have a crop, a transform, and a corner positioner. So I have those kind of sticking together. And then as I got to more compositing stuff, I now have a color corrector, unsharp, blur, a drop shadow. So you kind of have a various array of things that are helping kind of push this composite back together. But if you look at it as a whole, you kind of have your mattes, your translations, and then you have more of your single one-off nodes that are comping together. So just to kind of tie that back together on how you're working and keeping track of how you're working, and then taking into account the knowledge of like using this switch to produce the mustache on its own so that you're not reprocessing the footage back over again. That way you're getting the cleanest composite possible where you're not hurting your footage. So I hope you learned something in this tutorial. It was helpful. And yeah, I'm going to have I'll have this project file up on the site so you can download this final if you want to check anything. Obviously, you can go to, I'll have the links to these, to this footage and this image, which is all in pixels, so they're free to download. And just a note, I'm not a fan of working with video files inside of here, and this is a MP4. So if you want to have a little easier time, you should take time to process it into some form of image sequence. And so I've been working off of a JPEG sequence, just, you can actually see there's a little bit of a color shift between those. But yeah, it was having a hard time processing video file, and you really should be working off of video files. So I have a JPEG sequence that I'm working off of. So if you need to relink it back up, process an image sequence of some type, or try your luck with the video file. So, and just want to say, if you're finding any help in these tutorials, it does help to subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment if you have any questions, anything else you're interested in seeing. It does help the channel kind of grow. And yeah, thanks for watching.